Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to ask everyone to please come back to the main room and take a seat. We're going to start our program up again momentarily. So if you are grabbing a snack or some coffee, please come back into the main room and take a seat, and we will begin the program in just a few moments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will turn it over to the Consul General for our last session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. In many French organizations, it's forbidden to organize a meeting after 5 p.m. So, so we started at 4:45, so nobody can complain. I think it's a great rule because many times during the day we hinted at the importance of striking a balance between personal life and work life, and I think this is one of the key elements. Well, so thank you so much for being here, and I'd like to thank our speakers for being with us. This is the concluding panel. So generally, concluding panel are quite popular. And I think it has been an extraordinary day. I heard many ideas and assessments that I had not heard before, or not with the same strength. And so I think we are taking back really important findings for the life that will now start of our network. So as I explained briefly, opening this day, we are launching this network. You're all part of that network, so that we could share experience between the various institutions that are on board, and maybe develop projects on a bilateral basis, faculty-driven, for those who want to think that something can be done. I just cite one example. We had Victoria Butson from the Kennedy School with us today, and Sciences Po, our leading university for social sciences in France, was very interested in the WAPP program she had developed, and they developed a mirror program, and they asked Harvard advice on how to develop that program, and Harvard provided advice and was also interested in some findings in the development of the Sciences Po program. I think this was purely bilateral. I think it's an interesting example of what members of the network can do. And again, the sponsors were generous enough to give us enough funds to have to create a seed fund. So the consulate now, in the months to come, will try and see what kind of projects we can support. So that's the ambitious task we have ahead of us. And for our concluding panel, I'm very pleased to have speakers that in a way reflect the composition of that network, because it's a network with professors that are the ones who can tell us the results of their research on gender inequality, administrators that are used to, that create these kind of programs, but we also have sponsors, and their support has been extremely important for the success of this day, as well as third personalities that can bring specific insight on a question. So today, that's exactly what we have on our panel. May I start with you, Jason? Jason Beckfield, you're Professor of Sociology at Harvard University. You chair the Weatherhead Initiative on Gender Inequality. So maybe if you could explain to us what this initiative is and the results it has had. You investigate the institutional causes and consequences of social inequality, and you have worked on issues of gender inequality in labor forces, participation and wages in the European Union after the Equal Pay Directive. And so you have this European insight as well. Thank you so much. Mina you've been the Vice President for International Relations at Université Paris Sciences et Lettres. You're responsible for developing and implementing PSL's international strategy and partnerships. Between 2013 and 2018, you were Chief Scientific and Technology Advisor at the French Embassy in Washington. And MINAFARM, between 2010 and 2013, you were Director of European and International Relations at the CNRS, which is France Research Agency, well-known, world-famous research agency. Isabelle Estèbe. Isabelle, you're the Director of Global Affairs for Dassault Systèmes. Thank you very much again for the support, Dassault Systèmes support for this initiative. At the end of 2016, you were appointed Executive Director for the newly created Dassault Systèmes US Foundation. As a distinguished engineer, you joined Dassault Systèmes in 1990, and you have since held various roles in research and development, marketing and communications. And Olga Granaturova. Olga, you've been in the global healthcare industry for more than 20 years. You're also an angel investor and business advisor at Capital Angels, a mentor at YPO's and YNG's Entrepreneurial Accelerator, and you're a co-founder of LuciditAI. You will explain us, this great initiative. So, as such, you know the challenges startup founders face, and I guess we've discovered throughout the day that here there is a really important issue. So I will ask each of you to say briefly from your experience and from the debates today, which were not debates, were more discussions today. What are the conclusions you draw? What are the important, the most important elements on which we could work collectively? I think universities have 4 missions. One is to train, one is to develop knowledge, develop research. The third one is to give new opportunities, and I think that is the crucial role of lifelong learning, which is an issue that was, an aspect that was referred to several times during the day, and I think it's of growing importance. And the fourth one is to promote values, including via the alumni and the alumni associations. I think several university presidents referred to that aspect. I had not thought of it, but I think it's quite interesting. So how do you see, from all what we've heard today and from your experience, how do you see, what can we do collectively? What can universities do? And what can they do jointly if they want to? Maybe, Jason, we can start with academia, which owes our respect. And if you can, tell us how you see the situation.
Sure. Well, first of all, I, like the other panelists, I'm sure want to thank the hosts today, and I am honored really to be a part of this conversation. So thank you for convening this important discussion. I was a faculty co-sponsor of the Weatherhead Initiative on Gender Inequality, which was a 4-year multidisciplinary effort to gather scholars from around Harvard who had interests in the drivers of gender inequality, mostly in the set of rich democracies, kind of the core OECD. We limited the scope in that way. And the group got off to sort of a funny start. It was really led by my colleague, Mary Brenton, who was the previous chair of the sociology department. And she had assembled a world-class team of scholars on gender inequality that also included Sasha Killewald, Claudia Golden, Kathleen McGinn, Iris Bonet, some other leaders around Harvard. And they were seeking support for this initiative. And they were told, well, as a group of only women, you really need to have a man on board to have this be a legitimate intellectual exercise, which was quite a stunning thing to hear, as you might imagine. I was then offered the opportunity to play the token, so I was happy to play the token. Figured turnabout was fair play. I teach about gender inequality. Some of my research is on gender inequality, so it was a privilege to be welcomed into that effort. And so across the 4 years, we had a really wide array of different research presentations, really using cutting-edge methods from ethnographic work, deeply inside organizations to large-scale econometric studies on the factors that produce gender inequality. And I think we came to more questions than answers, clearly, but I think it's not overstating the case to say that there were really two major themes that stuck out across very many of the research that we considered, many of the research studies that we considered. One was the very strong role of social policy in distributing valued goods between genders. That really stood out quite a lot. And the other factor that stood out was something that was mentioned on the last panel, and that was the way in which work and family intersect to drive a lot of the inequalities we see in the workplaces and the economy. So those were the two powerful themes. And I think moving forward, the group found that it's really at the intersection of social policy and work-family conflict that presents opportunities for progress toward gender equity. And one of our concluding events was to participate in a summit on gender equity that brought together lots of different actors around the university. President Bacow offered a opening address to that, which was very powerful, I thought, for the cultural signal that it sent to the community that this is actually something that is a priority. And that's obviously a really important factor in pushing for gender inequality or gender equality. I think the factors that drive gender inequality are actually no great mystery anymore. And I think the factors that can be institutionalized to produce gender equity are actually not a mystery either. I think it's primarily a question of political will and resources and risk to make it happen. So I'm very happy to be here and offer what thoughts I can along those lines.
Well, thank you. Just before leaving the floor to the other speakers, is there a follow-up to that initiative, this gender initiative? I'm sure you have produced very interesting studies, but in operational terms, do you plan to share those conclusions with, I don't know, other experts or an international organization? You referred to OECD. Is that someone you interact, an organization you interact with? How do you see the follow-up of the initiative in the coming months?
Yeah, so I think the main product of the initiative was to formulate a scholarly community at Harvard of people who share interests in this field. We seeded several research projects that were started by young scholars, and so the primary product is the intellectual community. What that intellectual community does, I think is really still quite an open question. Mm-hmm. But I personally would love to see some engagement with international organizations on this, because one of the things that we found is that sharing lessons about what works across different contexts is very important, not only for the obvious practical reason, but also for the intellectual one, which is that you really can't understand the institutional drivers of something as big as gender inequality without varying on institutional contexts and seeing the ways in which those work together with work-family concerns to produce inequity.
Well, thank you so much. Because sometimes I'm just wondering, in France, in the US, in other European countries, other than France, you will find the academic capabilities to study, to have in-depth studies of a particular phenomenon, and then this will be used by, for policy making in the medium term. But I'm wondering if in other parts of the world, there's interest in those issues, but there may be a way so that the studies that have been carried out in various institutions can benefit to all, actually. So that's why, Mina Fab, can you, as an administrator of PSL, how do you see the interaction of universities? And are there particular elements of the day that particularly struck you and you would like to refer to?
Well, again, I would like to thank you, the organizers and Northeastern, to host us in such a nice venue. So what I got from all the discussions of today are a few things that I would like to share with you. What I got from the conversation is that, well, the confidence, the self-confidence of women are still to be built, and there are various ways to help them in this, help them or convince them that they don't need to be helped. There is also, it was said also that men's culture has to be changed, and yes, there are still a lot to do. So all the things that seems to me quite puzzling is that top-down actions is not really what we should do, and the leaders of universities this morning said that they will encourage things to happen but not decide for the others. The questions of the former panel about quotas or not quotas is interesting, because I think we really have to go maybe a bit in depth in these in this discussion. And I was struck by the idea that women are in general over-mentoring and under-sponsored. This is really interesting. And the over-mentoring is the first time I really hear about that. And I think I will make it for myself. And I would like to say also that I'm part of this association that was mentioned by Alain Fuchs this morning, which is an association of higher education, research and innovation, female scientists or managers. And the important words in this association is that they are leaders. They want to be leaders, or they are leaders. And I was said that some of the members of this association feel that we should take off this leading word in the name of the association, because some women will feel not comfortable about telling that they want to become leaders. And for me, it's the opposite. I think that the important word is that these women really want to become leaders. So there are a lot of things to do, and I was really interested in hearing about all my colleagues today.
You're absolutely right. I was struck by this idea that we need to change the culture of an organization. And in a way, it echoes what you just said, Jason, about this initiative you had to create an intellectual community within Harvard. And Mina, how do you see this idea that a collective process within one university can change the culture of the university? Is this something that you are thinking about for PSL, bearing in mind that Université Paris Sciences et Lettres has just been created to merge extremely prestigious and old institutions we have in France, such as the Collège de France or the École Normale Supérieure. So how do you see this idea of a culture?
Well, I think that PSL has two words that define us. Excellence, for sure, and we are not the only one, but also diversity. But diversity in a sense that we would like to be more open to all kinds of profiles, of course, all being good in terms of academic skills, but coming from different places, locations, cultures. So we are highly supporting the international attractiveness of our university to get people from all countries, all backgrounds, and we are also cultivating the interdisciplinarity among the curriculum. We try to give the opportunity to each student to have majors, but also to have other type of training. And for instance, we have a bachelor program which has been launched by PSL, which is offering the possibility to the students to have a major, for instance, in physics, but also do art or music or philosophy. And this is very well attractive to female. We have in this curriculum, bachelor curriculum, we have 60% of girls who are applying, all of excellent level, of course, and boys also. And this is a way also to offer a more diverse type of curriculum, which may be more attractive to young girls for some reasons, because they don't feel that they have to be excellent in only one type of discipline, but can open well, they can learn from different types. So this program is very, very successful, and we are proud of having it.
Well, thank you so much. Maybe Isabelle, from the point of view of the corporate world, how do you see today's universities, and especially from the point of view of gender equality? You know, you are the ones that are hiring the students once they have graduated. So, what do you expect from universities, and how do you see this relation between universities and large companies that can be a very productive one? Because obviously here you have a natural partnership to help universities, prepare the students for their career. So how do you see that situation? And from our debates today, are there particularly, assessments that you found interesting?
Industry is my background. So Dassault Systèmes, just to give you a brief background on the company, Dassault Systèmes is a scientific company. We have 20,000 people in 140 countries, different nationalities. And just as an introduction, we do software. We provide 3D technology for people to reinvent the world. So we are very rooted in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And just as an anecdote, number 1 goal is to fight poverty. Number 2 is to fight hunger. Number 3 is, I forgot, health. Number 4 is education. And number 5 is gender equality. There are others afterwards, but gender equality is really, so I don't want to change the focus of the discussion. This is not a climate change discussion, this is about gender equality. But from an industry standpoint, I think our major goal is to fulfill our customers' request. What we see, and I'm speaking from industry, from software, from technology companies, what we see is really a challenge today is to respond to our customers. Customers come first from the industry and the corporate world. And what the customers are saying, we need more talents. They're begging us to come, we are making software. They're asking us to provide more talents, to provide talents earlier so that people are really trained very early and ready to go to work. So this is a major challenge. And for women, I think this is really an opportunity because the space is huge. There is a need for new talents. For women, this is a huge opportunity. So how do we get to work with universities on training the right talents for the future? Also, another point that was mentioned earlier is by 2050, 1/3 of the jobs in the industry will be new jobs. We don't know what these jobs are today. So the challenge is working with university. How are we going to invent What are those jobs? 1/3 of the jobs, we don't know today what they will be. So there is a joint work to do with universities. What are those jobs going to be? How do we train people for jobs that do not exist today? This is a huge challenge. And I think this is really an industry and probably software also point of view. Women are problem solvers. Women like to solve problems. They like to see the impact on their communities. They like to see the impact on society. They don't want to do just tech for tech or science for science. So I will give a few more examples later on, but women want to see really practically what their impact is. And my point here is we don't need to necessarily compare men and women, but there is a unique space for women to express themselves in the industry and in the corporate world. I come from, you mentioned engineering, so a long time ago, when I was an engineering student, there were 5% of women in my class. Now we have approximately, in the aerospace industry, 15% of women. We have 20% women in the US technology jobs. This is not enough, definitely. We have more women in food industry, in health industry, in textile. We need to increase this, definitely. So how do we work with universities to increase those numbers? What if the first man on Mars is a woman? Why not? I mean, it could very well be a woman on Mars. So I think there are three suggestions that we are working on, and I will give example later on the panel. First of all is to think in terms of skills and competencies. As I said, we don't have to compare men and women. We have different skills, so how do we emphasize the women's skills in the curriculum? The second is, it has been said many times, but I will repeat it, we need to educate men. Aragon disait, la femme est l'avenir de l'homme. Female are the future of men, but we can reverse it. I mean, I think the future comes by educating men. It has been said many times, so I won't repeat. And the last thing is, we need to empower young girls to picture themselves in the jobs of the future. We need to open the doors of the companies, of the corporate world, to students. And when I mean students, it starts from kindergarten, middle school, college, of course, and then we have programs for adults, for veterans, but we need to open the doors and make the two worlds communicate better, because this way, I think women will picture themselves in the future and in future technology, corporate world better. We will break the fear barrier there.
Definitely. There were two aspects which I found extremely interesting during our discussion today. Was that universities can partner, but to what extent? That's the question, with high schools or with schools to make it possible for young girls to have a broader perspective and to make real choices. And there was also this idea that lifelong education could give another opportunity at a later stage, at master level, for instance, to embark on scientific studies. And I found this aspect interesting. Do you have examples of this kind of initiatives or this kind of profiles that are being trained right now, or that will be the next generation?
I could give you two examples of what we've implemented, for example, in our space. One is internal and one is external. Internally, we have our own initiative. We call it WIN, for Women in Network. So internally, we've put this program together to, as I said, we are a global company. So given the cultural differences, the local values, the local sensitivities, we want to share at a global level programs where women are involved in going out to association. For example, there are women in data science, women in medical tech, or women in engineering. Those associations, they need, and that was said earlier, we encourage women in our workforce to become active in those associations, in those networks. It's going out and be proud of what they are and see what they can become. We share this on our platform. We have speakers coming. We would love to have more people from universities come and talk about programs to grow, because education is a lifetime now, and this is very important to have the two worlds together. And the other initiative, which is the external association you mentioned in my title, is the foundation, La Fondation Dassault Systèmes. So La Fondation was created to focus on education and provide the technology tools early in education. And we provide grants to schools, to universities, to education partners to promote the use of technology. For example, we provided a grant to a technology college working on composites. This is mostly used in aerospace, but could be used for other industries as well. And we had two girls, and they were so shy. They said, no, I don't want to be on the video. I said, come on, this is really useful for your peers, useful for other women who want to be in technology. And they said, oh, okay, I get it. So, okay, I accept to be on the video. I accept to talk about my background and why I picked this industry and what I picked this curriculum. So this is another way we encourage women, and very early age, so they can picture themselves, as I said before, in the future as active in the workforce.
Well, thank you, Isabelle. Those are great examples. We heard today many examples that are extremely, that should lead us to be optimistic. And yet, there is one aspect, that's why I'm so happy, Olga, that you're with us today. There's one aspect which I found extremely concerning, which was when we were discussing women entrepreneurship. Despite Clémence Casalot's optimism, I think that the figures on access to venture capital are just appalling. And in a way, if I find it very concerning, is that for the other aspects, everything seems to go in the right direction. More opportunities. What the university presidents were describing at the beginning of our discussions was so clear. The fact that the situation changed dramatically. They were talking about the students, female students at MIT and Harvard 30 years ago. So the situation has changed dramatically. But yet, when it comes to women entrepreneurship here, apparently there's a sticky point, something which is quite concerning for the future, because those qualities that entrepreneurs develop are now more and more praised by companies. And so you could say that in 20 years' time, these are the skills that will be required for a successful professional life. So, Olga, how do you see that situation? And how do you see in that landscape what universities can do? Because this is really the age you can start your company at any age. I met a wonderful gentleman here in Boston who's 80 and who has been developing his business 2 years ago. So, but the right age to start, at least, or to be interested in this new mindset and to create a company is actually when you're a student. So how do you see that relation?
Oh, thank you. So, well, first of all, again, I would like to thank the organizers and for invitation. And on behalf of Brighter Ventures, we're really honored to be included as part of a solution on the issues around gender inequalities. So I'll back up a little bit, just for those of you who are not familiar with Brighter Ventures. So Brighter Ventures is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is changing stereotypes of entrepreneurship by advancing women-led startups. So at Brighter Ventures, we identify high growth potential of women startups, and we connect them with resources that they need to succeed. So we provide coaching, network entry, and access to capital for global startup competition. We have assembled a network of individuals, C-level executives from corporations, men and women, who can actually leverage their professional expertise, but also networks, which, again, we heard so many times today, are extremely important to women. It's extremely important to any entrepreneurs, but women and minority in particular. And so they could help connect these women with resources that they need. We could provide this introduction to actually your first customer, or MOU, or LOI, to actually demonstrate traction to the VCs later on. So you can actually say, this is not just me, other people actually believe in me. And we have partnered with NYU Stern, HEC Paris, London School of Economics, and this is a fantastic event, and again, thank you so much for inviting us, to actually talk to our university to see how we can collaborate, and maybe we can all unite under the same mission. Again, one of the things that we were talking about is, especially in executive education, there is a lot of alumni. And we do need not just women-to-women networking, we do need to bring more men into this conversation because, again, majority of decision makers are men. And a lot of them actually are allies. So they are willing to actually listen and willing to sponsor somebody. So we are having those discussions. And we're also collaborating with Women's Forum for Economy and Society. Communication is actually the key also to changing perceptions. So it's very important to celebrate. So one of the things that Isabelle was saying is actually convincing our people and our role models to step up and actually talk about how they've done it, what they've done it, and visibility is extremely important, and celebrating success is extremely important as well. But also, it's a great opportunity also for us at the Women's Forum to talk about what are the hurdles, what are the problems, but also how can we overcome it. So not just starting it, these are the problems, but talking about actionable steps. What can we do about it? And one of the things we're also working right now with is we're working with EcoBank. It's a Pan-African banking conglomerate. And we're working to develop a program with them to identify and scale women-led small businesses. One of the things that I wanted to say that a lot of times actually the governments misunderstand the women-led entrepreneurship. What I mean by that, so there's two different things. So there is a small businesses, but there's also high-growth startups. High-growth startups are the ones who are responsible for most job creation. However, when you look at most of the programs designed at or aimed at women, they put 51% women ownership as a threshold. And that actually becomes a problem because a lot of times, especially if you take some VC money, or if you have co-founders who are male, which again leads to diversity, as we talked about, you no longer qualify for those programs. And that's something that perhaps we should really reconsider. So today is important that we continue on this path to concrete steps that allow us to identify what are the bottlenecks, what are the root causes, and again, how we can remove those barriers. I really liked, Zara brought up this paper, and we were actually discussing it in the green room as well. So it's a paper that talked about we ask men to win and women not to lose. What it means by that, and you're probably familiar with that paper, what I loved about this paper is actually the end, that we're actually talking not just what happens, but what can you do about it. So I'm also a scientist by training, so when I was reading this, and I have pitched to investors before, not only I'm a woman, but I'm also a scientist, so when they ask me questions which were more about risk-averse questions, or how I'm going to keep my customers, I actually engaged into that conversation because that's a reasonable question to ask, and I responded as such. But actually, after reading the paper, I recognized that there is a regulatory framework. So again, there is profit-oriented questions and loss-oriented questions. So men were asked a lot of questions about how you're going to grow your business, how you're going to continue acquiring new customers, and women were asked, all risk-averse questions. And if women were asked and addressed those questions, they either received no money or they received very little money. But what's nice about this paper is that actually you can recognize it as a woman, for example. I read it. I recognize what I need to do. So just because somebody asked me that question, I can now reframe it, and I can answer a different question. But it's also a very useful tool also to educate VCs, judges on the panels, to actually recognize that you need to have a more balanced approach to asking questions, which would also lead to better investments, because you can sit down, have a little checklist. I ask each individual 5 risk-averse questions, 5 growth-oriented questions. Then I actually have a better understanding of the venture that we're discussing. So we need more of this type of research from the universities because it actually addresses concrete steps. What can we do about it? There was another point that I think Susan brought up, and it was about SAT scores and biases. So we need that type of research because, if we just talk about we need to eliminate bias, it's not concrete. We don't know what to do about it. But if you actually can state exactly what behaviors you want to change, then you actually can look at it. So SAT thing was just remove male or female from the beginning. Put it at the end or don't put it at all. It doesn't really matter for the SAT. So those are actionable steps. So when you talk to females, when you talk to males, everybody can understand it, and it's very, very transparent. So, so it's important that we continue on this. I think it's a powerful agenda to change. But we need to really commit to this. And we need to put real money behind it if we really want to do that. So we need more capital, we need more brains, we need more champions. And I look forward to working with universities here. I look forward to working with corporations to bring them in and to identify more leaders who actually can share the network and connect women with that first customer and share their expertise. Because as you said, advancing women entrepreneurs is not just nice to have. It's an economic issue. We talk about startups all the time as we drive in growth. It's great for society because then you get better solutions to the problems. Because right now we only choosing from 50% of all available solutions. But it also creates, doesn't matter if your venture succeed or not, you build in skills, you build in leadership skills and professional networks. Then you can now take and be going somewhere else across society to corporations or somewhere else or private and public sectors and use those skills. And actually it lifts women economically as well.
Well, thank you, Olga. Thank you very much. I have one more question before opening the floor to the audience. It's primarily for Mina, because it's about the relations universities can develop and how they can try and address some challenges jointly. Not as institutions, but it's usually more a faculty-driven process. Individuals within each university that find it important to work together to have a joint approach. But Minister Vidal referred to this in her message. She referred to that initiative called the U7. In this initiative, a series of leading universities met in Paris and discussed today's global challenges. Can you just tell us a bit more about this initiative, describe it as you were part of it, and explain to us its value and see if there is any conclusions to be drawn from that particular method?
Right. So this is a brand new initiative which was launched at the occasion of the G7, which was in France this year, and President Macron was hosting this event. And interestingly, we realized that there were at that time 9 groups of interests which are working at the occasion of the G7 everywhere in the world. And although there is one group which is dealing with science, there is no group really dealing with higher education and universities. So we proposed, the French proposed to create a new group which was called U7 for universities. 7 is like the G7, it's an alliance, and we call for volunteers from every country of the G7, but also from countries from other part of the world, including Africa. And the idea was to gather as much universities as possible to think together about how to make progress in the way to work together, and also to take into account the role of universities in this international type of audience, let's say. And this was launched by, well, we were a group of 13 universities and schools in France. Of course, a bit too much, but maybe it's because we were the leading this initiative. And altogether, we had nearly 50 universities worldwide who took in, well, who were interested in being there. Most of them were in Paris in July this year, in fact. And after 2 days of discussions and meetings, we went to a statement, and I just want to read the first sentence of this mission statement of this group. So this U7 plus, finally we add the plus, brings together universities from G7 countries and beyond, with the African countries in particular, who are committed to academic freedom and scholarly values and convinced of the key role of universities as global actors to engage in discussions leading to concrete action to address pressing global challenges. So it's very ambitious, but the idea is that it was really going to solutions rather than just, and put the university at the heart of discussions, but also decisions, and that was really something rather new. And what we have written is different principles. 6 principles were voted, and among these principles, it's all about community engagement, international experience, diversity, environmental issues, and inclusiveness in order to face the global challenges and to contribute to make positive change a reality. It's very ambitious, but it has to be very concrete, and we really want to work. It's just a group of people who wants to work together. It was this decision were taken at the highest level of the university, president, chancellors, and the next step would be to go to New York. I think the next meeting will be in New York, and we really want to produce action from what has been said there. And we have these 6 principles that you can find on the internet, or I can provide them to you. For PSL in particular, we are in a group with the University of Toronto, where we decided that we would promote from sorry, I'm lost in my notes. So now, yes, the leading universities will work with all the others to promote all these different principles, and we hope that for the next meeting we will have some concrete actions to show and try to work together in a very proactive way, and sharing experience, and also promoting all what we are talking about, especially women in all these actions.
Well, thank you. I think that's a very ambitious perspective. Yes, Jason, you?
If I may,
yes.
I think one thing universities can do is recognize their role in training, the elites of, organizations and of state bureaucracies and other kinds of leaders. And I think the specific decisions that universities make, especially the risky ones that actually foster gender equity, I think can be powerful and can be lessons that are shared among different universities. Just two specific examples of that. I'm not always proud of everything that Harvard University does, but there were two things that Harvard administrators did recently that were very difficult and that cost political capital and that cost money and will probably cost more money into the future, but took strong stands. One of them was a stand the university took toward spaces of sexual assault and gender harassment in private clubs that tend to be very male-dominated and are really centers of male privilege and power. And the university took specific actions to disincentivize membership in these organizations and participation in these organizations, which cost the relevant dean, quite a lot of political capital and was tough. And I don't think he would have been able to take those decisions without the political cover, of the president and of the upper leadership. And the second example that I'll give is there was a faculty member who, was charged with some very serious professional misconduct, along the lines of gender and sexual harassment. And the dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences suspended this person, who's a famous intellectual, tenured member of the faculty, without pay for 2 years. And I think those kinds of actions can send very important messages to the future leaders of the economy and of states about what kind of behavior is appropriate and what kind of behavior is not appropriate.
Well, thank you so much. We'll open the floor to the audience. If you can make either questions or comments or ideas of what universities, companies, various stakeholders can do together as part of initiatives. It's a collective thinking, and we would welcome any comment. Yes, thank you.
My name is Sheila Puffer. I'm a faculty member here at Northeastern. I teach international business. Thank you, everyone, for coming. My question, I had it in the back of my mind at the beginning of this of this panel, and now you brought up sexual harassment. What about backlash that we've been hearing about in the press against women who are trying to advance professionally as a result of the Me Too movement now?
I think what this illustrates is that fundamentally gender equity is about power, and people who have power don't particularly want to relinquish it or share it, right? So this is inherently contested and inherently political. And I think one thing that universities can do, especially on the topic of gender harassment and sexual harassment, is to share best practices about what kinds of contexts make that less likely and reduce opportunities for sexual harassment and gender harassment. As I was thinking about what I would say today, I revisited some best practices that were shared on the issue of sexual harassment and gender harassment in the university. And this doesn't address everything to do with the Me Too movement, because that spans many, many other sectors of the economy and sectors of civic life and political life. And so the universities are just a narrow slice. But I think universities can lead in some ways. So I'm going to reference a paper by Sharon Potter and Justine Tinkler, which is a terrific paper. They note that things like having visible policy statements, regular reviews, of policies and action steps that can be taken can be successful. Policies to prohibit dating or sexual relationships between faculty and students can be very helpful, at avoiding these issues. Having a third-party reporting structure for experiencing sexual harassment and gender harassment is something that turns turns out to be pretty important. And that's a very tricky one because some universities are not actually so enthusiastic about doing that because they have to cede control to a third party, right? And so again, we come back to power. But it's important. Collaborative mentoring of graduate students instead of one-on-one mentoring. You can see how that changes the power dynamic in a way that makes people less vulnerable to sexual harassment and gender harassment. Establishing mentoring compacts to clarify roles. Thinking about whether evening events with alcohol are really necessary in an academic setting, and thinking very carefully about how those are actually deployed. Clarifying to graduate students that they shouldn't date undergraduates. Frequent statements about the fact that sexual and gender harassment are just not acceptable. And I think that means that people in positions of power need to take the risks of having hard conversations, right? And since this is such a gendered phenomenon, what it means is that men have to have conversations with other men, right, that are not easy, right? But if those things don't happen, and if the men who are in the positions where they have to have those difficult conversations to correct someone's behavior don't have the political cover from up above, right, then they don't happen. So again, it's, power and leadership are actually really important. I would go even further and say that a departmental practice, that I've tried to institutionalize as chair of my department, to again kind of change the opportunity structure around sexual and gender harassment, is to not have events outside of regular business hours. I think that also supports people in balancing their work and family life. So there's not an expectation that you go to a lot of evening events. And I also think, there are things that universities can do to ameliorate the political backlash to the Me Too movement in the domain of recognition and, making the contributions and leadership of women visible, right? How often do we go into a space on a university campus that has all white males, all around the room, right? In photographs. I mean, this does not have to be that way. And I think that kind of symbolic recognition turns out to be really important in communicating signals about, what kinds of behavior is appropriate and what not. But I think, I think you're right to point out the fact that this is, fundamentally a question of politics and requires constant contestation.
So I have it's a great panel. I have a quick observation and follow-up to, I think, Olga, a point you made and a suggestion. It's so true what you're saying about the schizophrenic behavior of investors, because they will say, first and foremost, they invest in the people, not the technology. And they will also say that entrepreneurs who have failed are a good thing for them because they feel as if they've learned. And yet, as you said, they will ask women questions and make a very quick assessment of risk, which is completely different than they would do with a male entrepreneur. So my suggestion is this: when I look at who's been in the room with us today, we have academia at the table, we have industry from the science side, from the public affairs and government affairs side. So we have industry, we have academia, we have government, but we don't have the investment community here. And there are VCs, and most large companies have strategic arms. Mm-hmm. Big companies invest as well. So I think going forward, as we're convening and we're talking about these issues, we should have the investment community, because we should be talking about what they can do and making them aware of their behavior, their schizophrenic behavior, but more importantly, how do we bring them into this network to help with mentoring, coaching, and getting to know some of these women entrepreneurs so that they're not strangers. This is a very incestuous little community here where people know one another, and that makes a big, big difference. So I think that would be a suggestion that I would offer going forward. They're big players. They have a lot to do with a lot of what we're talking about, and so we should have them in the room.
Thank you, Suzanne.
No,
Olga, can you talk about the investment community and how they see the situation?
So I completely agree with you, and I think there's a couple of things. First, we should bring them in, and actually not just the VC community, but also angel investors. And there was a lot of talk previous years that, and it's true, we still don't have enough of VC women, and there was a lot of talk, if we increase number of women in the VC community, all of a sudden we're going to see so much more investment in women. Absolutely did not happen at all. And there was actually another really good paper, you probably know it too, from Greenberg and Malik, and they talked about the bias that we have is actually men and women have the same. And so the whole paper and previously about VC women was whole based on homophily, so birds of the same feather flock together. What they found actually, if you are a woman in a male-dominated world, your homophily is not to your gender. Your homophily is to your organization and to the culture and so on and so forth. So you're not really thinking about that. But what we all actually can do, one of the things that we discussed in the paper, is actually what they call the activist choice homophily. So on a crowdfunding, there is a lot of people who actually believe in the cause that women are underrepresented as the founders of tech or construction. And even if you don't care about construction or tech, you can actually go to crowdfunding platforms, find some projects that interest you and you think it's a good investment, and you can invest in them. So the bias is not just men, women and men, and we do need to have that conversation. And that's one of the things also university can do to actually show people that there is bias. It's not just men, women have it. I took one of the Harvard online tests when you have to go very, very quickly, like men, woman, who picks up the children. So, first I was going really, really fast, then we changed it, and you really have to think about who's going to pick up the children. And then you still come off as slightly biased, even though you know exactly what they're asking. So, we are the product of the society, and it's been a very, very long time that we've been doing it. And the other thing, to your point, what entrepreneurial centers and universities can do is actually have more of these connections that we talked about. Bring in more corporations and more of your entrepreneurial startups, bringing them together so they can actually connect and build those networks, and it's super important. And again, representation is also the key. That's something that we talked about too. So we need to commit everywhere, corporations, but also universities, that they have equal representations at all levels. So as corporations, we can say that we're not going to go to the panels if there is no women whatsoever, or we're not going to sponsor something that, and you have to look at the whole value chain. Who are going to be consultants, who are going to be freelancers, and so on and so forth. So really, it requires work, but we need to be conscious about that.
There's another great paper that I can't resist mentioning in this connection. That is a paper by Frank
At the end
Dobbin.
of the panel, we'll cite each.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a terrific paper. It's a Harvard Business Review paper by my colleague Frank Dobbin, and the title says it all. The title is "Training Programs and Reporting Systems Won't End Sexual Harassment. Promoting More Women Will." So again, on the representation point.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions from the audience? Yes, please.
This morning, the Minister of France, Frédéric Vidal, told that there were sexual harassment was to fight against sexual harassment was a priority for the government. And indeed, there are like des cellules de veille, which are like sexual harassment plans to fight against this. And so in lots of universities in France, you have a campaign and you have reference that are trained about this thematic. And I'd like to know if in your university here, there are such plans with part of training about this thematic, and like people are the open door to, if you have a student that, well, we know that PhD students are it's a place where there is lots of power fight because it's and I'd like to know if there are some plans in your university here. Sorry, I'm a little bit tired and my English is not so. And the jet lag.
It's fine. Thank you so much. That's what's great about experience sharing. It's maybe you can describe the many mechanisms that exist.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So on April 2nd of this year, we had the Gender Equity Summit that I mentioned that was all about the roles of sexual harassment and gender harassment, which is actually far more common than sexual harassment in gender equity and gender equality. And there's a lot of bad news and a little bit of good news. One of the pieces of bad news in the U.S. is that although we have a system of regulation that's under Title IX of the U.S. Federal Code, which gives universities the legal enablement to construct a reporting system, which establishes rules whereby anyone who experiences sexual harassment or gender harassment can report them, and then there's an investigative procedure that then kicks in. Lots of universities have Title IX offices, and so that's the kind of U.S. way of dealing with these things. One of the bad things about that system is that it's not great at protecting accusers against retaliation, because it tends to be something that is inspired by the U.S. legal system, which is a fundamentally adversarial system. And so, there's this tradition that accused face their accusers, and vice versa. And so it's within the framework of that legal system, and I think that's where some of the problems with Title IX set in. Sandy Levitsky is the person who is, the current authority on how different Title IX procedures at universities are working. And what she finds is that there are at least 3 different logics at work. There's a civil rights logic, which is the Title IX reporting system that people are fairly familiar with. There's also a student conduct logic, which is more about training students and training teachers about proper sorts of behavior. It's very education-based. But then there's a logic of the criminal justice logic that is more or less the backlash to anti-sexual harassment procedures. And that's the idea that the standard for being sanctioned for sexual harassment is a criminal standard. So you have to prove something, beyond a reasonable doubt, right? And what's happening now, currently in contestation over, universities' anti-sexual harassment procedures, is that politically conservative judges mostly are ruling against universities on the basis of a criminal justice logic that is quite inimical to the hybrid systems that some universities have set up that combine the student code of conduct logic and the civil rights logic. It seems to be a blend of those two that works best, but they contradict this larger criminal justice logic that particularly conservative judges want to enforce. So I think we're coming up to the backlash against the proliferation of Title IX offices around the universities. So it's very much a moving target. But I would say the good news is that there are best practices that are out there. Iris Bonet's book, What Works, is a great example of the institutions that can facilitate gender equality. Joan Williams's biasinterrupters.org website gives very specific technologies that organizations can implement to interrupt bias. But it's a very tricky thing. Another piece of bad news is that Title IX training tends to have a polarizing effect on the men who experience it. So the research that's been done so far on the effects of Title IX training, which is anti-sexual harassment, anti-gender harassment, show that men who are already egalitarian before the training become more egalitarian after the training. But the downside is that the reverse is also true. Men who come into the training more misogynistic leave the training even more misogynistic than they already were, right? So, that turns out to be a very hard thing to address. And I think what people are finding is that it requires customized solutions at the work unit level so that they can incorporate the work culture. And that's one of the ways in which to be really serious about this stuff it would require a really massive investment of resources, right?
What is the work unit level for a university
like
Harvard? Is it the laboratory, the
so
school?
Sure. So it varies across the different fields. In the social sciences, it's the department. In the natural sciences, it's either the department or the lab. In some cases, you have big labs, but it varies quite a lot. And I think in the university setting, that's the organization of work is one of the major factors in the opportunity structure for sexual and gender harassment. The work units that are organized more like a system where there are very many students and very many staff members who are dependent on one researcher, one we call them PIs, principal investigators. That structure of political dependency is just built to create the kinds of problems that people experience at greater rates in those settings.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Well, thank you. This is exactly the kind of your questions. We are faced exactly with the same questions in France, though many of our universities do not have campuses, which makes, in a way, the problem easier, or at least there is one dimension which is not there. But the same challenges are there, and so it was a great question. And are there other comments or questions? So I guess we'll finish with that particular subject. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. It was a very successful and very productive day. It's wonderful to see that an initiative we've been working on for 1 year has been now officially launched, but now the challenge is ahead. We need to find the ways to make this forum useful, defining initiatives that can really address some of the issues we highlighted during our day. Thank you very much for being here. I'd like to thank the speakers that came, some of them from France, for our discussions today. And I hope we'll have a second edition at some point. One moderator said next year we'll have another edition. I said, no, it's not next year. What we have in mind is more in 2 years' time, to give us the time to reflect, to work on precise initiatives and see how we can bring together the various stakeholders, because I guess this is really one of the features of this initiative, is to have on board, universities, of course, that is professors and administrators of leading universities, but also the corporate world. We need the investment community, and also third parties that can give specific insight on the directions we should, the goals we should fix. Well, so thank you so much. Et à bientôt, as we say in French. Thank you.